with that Microsoft Team because of my another account. That account is somehow locked for my previous place of work, and I do not have power to change many things here. But I'll still try to show you my presentation. So I hope you hear me and you see my presentation, okay?
Yes, yes.
So, hello again to all the colleagues for the one more time. My name is YURII Mielkov. I represent the Institute of Higher Education of National Academy of Educational Sciences of Ukraine. But as the roundtable discussion was supposed to be international, so I have prepared my report and my presentation in English. I hope you do not mind, and I hope you'll understand what I am intended to say, okay? One more thanks for Ihor and for all the organizers to welcoming me to this roundtable conference. It is very interesting to see such a topic. And my title is The Duality of Ethics and the Value Dimension of the Contemporary Open Science. Well, it is quite a long one, but I have to confess, first of all, that I am not a specialist of ethics. My area of expertise is, well, philosophy of science. But in fact, neither was it Twardowski's main area of expertise because he used to study many other areas of philosophy. But still, I intend to, well, confess you some musings of mine based on the topic of scientific ethics present in Twardowski lectures that he used to read for many years since he became the chair of the philosophy department in Lwów University. And so the relation of the topic to the contemporary ethics of today's science, okay? So, well, Twardowski in his lectures of ethics used to single out quite a number of different directions, different type of ethics, and you can see he showed his students quite a scheme of different type of ethics with a rather interesting structure. But my main topic of talk today would be the opposition, the dichotomy of theological and atheological ethics. Well, in fact, Twardowski even used to say that there are types of ethics which originate from two different Greek words. Ethos from epsilon, starting with epsilon, and ethos starting with eta. Sorry, I do not speak Polish. I can only read it with a dictionary. But here is some important excerpt from Twardowski's lectures on his scientific ethics. When he singles out two different types of ethics, he calls them in Polish zwyczaj and obyczaj. Well, in English, I would say it is rather habit and custom. So, what he says that zwyczaj and obyczaj differ in that one can speak of individual's zwyczaj, that is individual's habit, but not of an individual's obyczaj, not of individual's custom. Obyczaj, in contrast to zwyczaj, means something rather collective, belonging to a community and at the same time sanctified by tradition, which prevails in certain stratum, in certain land or country, in certain nation. And there is something sanctioned in obyczaj, in habit, and it is an impersonal framework imposed on individual, indifferent from zwyczaj, indifferent from habit, which is an individual thing, a matter of taste. Well, in fact, Twardowski did not make those two types of ethics a strict opposition. In fact, he used to show how habit could be transported into custom because, well, if we, so to say, come from a historical point of view, that we may say that a habit will become a custom when it will be imposed as a habit of a community. And then after that, if we belong to this community, then we are no longer possible for us to judge that custom of our community, to be it good or to be it evil. But it is still an imposition. We have to follow that custom because we belong to this community. So even if that opposition of zwyczaj and obyczaj, habit and custom, is not an eternal opposition, there is some form of historical interconnection, but I think that is still a dichotomy because, well, it is habit which come into custom, but not custom which can be turned into habit. As far as I understood Twardowski's idea, well, it's still, if custom is something sentient and something social, then on the outside of the community, we are presented, we have to accept that custom as something that should be. Hence the claims to the people, hence the transformation of habit into customs, that is the transformation of звичай to обычай, and thus we can call it some kind of opposition, even if not historically, but for the time being, if we belong to that community. So I can outline several, so to say, types of the same very dichotomy expressed by Twardowski. As I said, he used to trace them to different Greek terms, ethos and ethos with epsilon and ethos with eta, but still, звичай and обычай, or Twardowski also sometimes uses Latin terms, consuetudines and mores, which is of course something evident for us, and that is a position of individual and impersonal of social ethic. That is the position of autonomous ethic and heteronomous ethics, because my habit is my own deed, and I have power over it, while I have no power over the custom of my community, which is something imposed over me as an individual. And if habit, if звичай is obligation towards oneself, as Twardowski says, then customs is obligations towards others. In fact, I can relate this kind of ethical dichotomy, which is stated by Twardowski in the form of the difference between, of the principal difference between звичай and обычай, to a kind of philosophical dichotomies I would call the dichotomies of ethos and morality. In fact, if ethos is the word we use today, and it comes from, well, it represents the kind following both type of Greek words, ethos and ethos, then now ethos is, I would define it as a form of custom, of habit, of community. So if ethos is something actual, is some form of customs present in a type of community, then the opposition is morality, or the deontological approach to ethics, which is something categorical imperative in the form of Kant. That is, it is a philosophical, well, of course, very famous, but Hume's guillotine, very famous opposition of is and not, or opposition of facts and values. That's not exactly the opposition of звичай and обычай, but I still would like to follow that line of Twardowski's musing about ethical dichotomies to lead them to the dichotomy of ethos and morality. That is, there are some actual norms that are professed or confessed by humans, by communities, and some form of deontological morality, which is, well, strictly formal in that matter. It is something that is ought to be, as opposed to what is socially accepted, what is habituated. Well, we can even refer to the topic of habitus, but it is still the position of factual and evaluational. Of course, that is a position in question, which was strictly formulated by Hume in the 17th century. That is still a kind of, not a modern kind of dichotomy. And in the 20th century, a little bit after Twardowski's work on the opposition of звичай and обычай, we can see that dichotomy of facts and morals, dichotomies of actual ethics and deontological ethics is being put into question. And it is my pleasure to refer to one more great philosopher, I would say, Ludwig Fleck. He was born here in Lwów, in Lviv or Lemberg in 1996, and he was representative of that Jewish community of the city, which Anna Brožek used to mention in her nice lecture just before myself. So he was a Polish Jew, and he was not a philosopher per trade. He was a microbiologist. He was a bacteriologist. He was, well, scientist engaged in medicine. He used to graduate from the medicine faculty of Franz Josef Lwów University, as it was called then. I'm not sure if he was a student of Twardowski, if he used to attend the Twardowski lectures on philosophy, but later in 1920s, he is known, Ludwig Fleck is known to have dispute, to have discussion with both Twardowski and Ajdukevich and Nestedora Domska, that also was mentioned in Anna Brožek's presentation. But he was a representative of a different approach, opposite to Vienna School, opposite even to Lviv-Warsaw School, but well, his ideas are very interesting. You see that even if he was a Polish Jew, he used to publish his main work in German. It was published in 1925 in Basel, Switzerland, and it remained almost totally unknown to the Western world, to the Eastern European world, until 30 years later, in 1960s, Thomas Kuhn, who used to write his Structure of Scientific Revolution on virtually the same topic as Ludwig Fleck did, until Thomas Kuhn brought Ludwig Fleck's work into attention of the philosophical communities of the whole world. Still, in recent years, it became evident that Ludwig Fleck ideas were quite ahead of his time. And, well, his critique of the Vienna School approach to philosophy was quite in line with Karl Popper's critics or other critics that are now evident in today's tradition of philosophy of science. So, what was Ludwig Fleck talking about? He used to aim his philosophical polemics against that very dichotomy of facts and values. As I said, he was a microbiologist. He was studying a very quite specific medical subject, but his main work on philosophy, he was very interested in philosophy, as you see, as he had a discussion with Twardowski about it. And his main work in philosophy is titled Emergence and Development of a Scientific Fact. You see, until then, in the positivist and empirical tradition, fact was something given. A fact was something given, and that's why it was imposed of us as is, as something that is, opposite to something that ought to be. When if facts are given, then values are socially constructed. What Ludwig Fleck used to argue about, that facts are themselves are socially constructed. Well, the very idea that a scientific fact can have an emergence and genesis and can live out a becoming, it was a very novel idea that had little to do with the previous philosophical tradition of positivism and of Vienna School. So, as Ludwig Fleck says, even in order to see some fact, we have to understand what is it, what does that fact mean. That is, if we do not see something, then we can't make a fact out of it. Natural science is not well connected just with studying nature. It has no less culture in it than it has nature. And what is important, and I can refer it to the opposition of individual and social, according to Ludwig Fleck, there is no difference in principle between the individual and the social, the collective. The individual can be examined from a collective point of view, just as much as the collective can be examined from an individual point of view. Also, in both cases, there are some specific to personality and to collective. But fact is changeable, just as the thought is changeable. If only because changes in thinking right flag reveal themselves in changing facts, and conversely, fundamental new facts can only be found through new thinking. That is, the dichotomy doesn't work actually in science, and facts are being socially constructed, and what is more important, facts of ours are interconnected between themselves. Just as well, we can say social and individual ethics is interconnected between itself. Well, it would be inappropriate not to mention another great author of the same period. It is Georgian philosopher Kazimierz, who is also virtually unknown to the West, but he used to write his problems of sociology of thought or sociology of mind. Just at the same time, Ludwig Fleck did write his genesis and development of scientific fact. And both those books, I repeat, were unknown to the West, so I doubt that Twardowski or any one of his followers could read those books. But according to Migrelid, it is indeed social in the science, any cognition is indeed social in its nature. And we can only study something we have interested in. We have some interested in. Well, here is some translation of his ideas that in order to be a reliable and remembering witness, the perception must be a biased perception, and the subject must be a biased subject, and the object not an indifferent object. That is, even in scientific cognition, we have facts and values entanglement in such a way that it is quite difficult to separate one from another. What does it mean? What does it mean for the noted ethical dichotomy of habit and custom, or zwyczaj and obyczaj? Well, I would say that it means the possibility to overcoming that dichotomy, because that dichotomy, in fact, I would say, does not lead to much good. If we consider those two types of ethics, zwyczaj and obyczaj, or habit and custom in English, being of the same order, saying that ethos, habit could well usurp the place of custom. Well, it is not the problem that the goals of some habits are bad, but that is the entity of a different order. If we have only habit, then it could replace the custom itself, the morality itself, and it would be one habitual morality that does not lead us to understanding what is good and what is bad. You know, well, here is a nice example of how that could happen on the subject of scientific activity. It is just how ethics in science works, and how high is the level of violation of academic integrity by the undergraduate students in different countries. As you can see, almost all developing countries of the today's world, which have mass higher education, which has a lot of undergraduate students at university, that any countries have a very high level of violation of academic integrity, of plagiarism. In Ukraine, it is even higher than in Poland or Russia and neighboring countries, and even the United States, it is a little bit lower, about 75% comparing to Ukrainian 90%, that it is still a critically high level of violation of academic integrity. What I mean about that violation is that if habit take place of the custom, or if ethos, in my terminology, takes place of morality, then we have ethos winning its place against the morality. Morality says that violating academic integrity is a bad thing, and we should not do it, but ethos says that it is actual, it is habitual. Everyone, well, steals everyone gives bribes or everyone behaves bad in our society, then it is natural for us to behave bad as well. Well, I mean, behaving bad is just well, violating some very minor, but still quite sound principle of academic integrity, like using Wikipedia to write your own course papers instead of writing it by yourself. Okay. So what I mean here is the position of ethos in morality had to be somehow redefined in order to solve that problem of ethos taking place of morality. In 1963, English philosopher Abraham Edel in his ethical studies used to make the distinction between the two types of ethics, very similar to Twardowski one. He used to name it the individual and social, in the terms that the individual morality is asking us the question, what will our conscience say? And the social morality asking the question, what will help to preserve our community? Any community, you see, any community, from nation state to down to an academic department, would direct its own activity towards preserving oneself, even in front of giving priority to that preservation over its main type of activity. As American philosopher Nicholas Rescher, who used to study this question, he called that relative ethics. And the problems of such relative ethics is its failure to distinguish between matters of custom and matters of principle, which is those I would refer to as ethos and morality. Because I say that morality must have precedence over ethos, because the very distinction of ethos and morality could be grounded only on morality itself. Well, that's quite some dialectical idea here, because only in relation to some necessary basis, something could be considered necessary or not necessary at all. Well, that's kind of stereoethics. There is a term stereoethics coined by Mikhail Epstein, but I call it as a 3D ethics because it adds another dimension to the dichotomy in question. What I mean here is the whole hierarchy of values and goals. That was proposed by Nicholas Rescher. So the social values are indeed not an opposition, not a, so to say, horizontal dichotomy, but a whole vertical structure where we have some higher level goals, higher level ethical norms, and lower level ethical norms. In science particularly, there is a special ethos formulated in 1943 by Robert Merton. It is universalism, communism, disinterestedness, and organized skepticism. The four norms of ethos of science, but in difference from what I call ethos as custom, as habitual custom, Merton called ethos what is rather a morality. That is, it is some normative structure. But what is more important is the distinction between universalism and particularism in ethics. You see, any particularism refers to the noted opposition of community moral, yes, what will preserve our community, and the individual moral, what will our conscience say. In that aspect, I would say that the problem lies between the very nature of the communities in question, whether this community is open or whether this community is closed. Well, it is known that Karl Popper himself used to write a lot about open and closed societies, but the first idea in philosophy was by Henri Bergson in the very beginning of the 20th century, and by Bergson, the open society is somewhat different. A closed society is a society that includes some people and excludes other people, while an open society, Bergson says, is deemed in principle to embrace all humanity. That is, the only possible science is the universal science. in the meaning that science could not be national science, ethnical science, gender science, professional science, etc., etc. It could only be human science. That's why I refer to the current trend of open science as a great chance for us to replace, to overcome that dichotomy in ethics of science. Open science started its way, well, just next Monday it would be 20 years for the open access movement. In Budapest it was started in 2002, but open access gave way to the tradition of open science, which is a much more profound enterprise, which calls for systemic change and for social changes in science. I consider the value structure of open science to be of 3 levels, where open access is grounded on the lower level, but the most interesting upper level is dedicated to the goals, to the idea of ranked utilization of science in society as a public and democratic enterprise. What means democratic enterprise? It just means answering the question of human person as the subject of certain known goals and values. In reference to that, dichotomy I used to cite, it is the primacy of our conscience over the task of preserving our community. That is, only a human person could be the subject of values and goal setting. The way to achieve that task, I could cite the differential ethics by the same Mikhail Epstein, who tried to impose his terror ethics as a way to achieve the dialectical unity of universality and plurality. Because, you know, only a human person could be the subject of both individual social values. And differential ethics mean that it is moral to do for others that which no one else can do except myself. To be for others, but not like others. That is some form of dialectical resolution of the opposition of the classical dichotomy of the individual and the social, of ethics and morality. And thus, the human commensurable post-classical science could be a way to solve that dichotomy. Hilary Putnam used to argue that the task of our time is to combine the theological ethics of Aristotle with its eudaimonism, with the formal ethics of Kant with its categorical imperatives, and post-classical science with its values could be just an example of such a combination, like human economics by Amartya Sen, who, well, just demonstrates the way to bring values into science in its very core. In fact, I see democratization of science as a way to achieve that human commensurable open science and the value setting for human personality itself. Classical science used to be very personal, but it used to be very limited in scope. Only the republic of the scientists of different countries, but a very limited number. The classical modern science is mass science, but the mass character is achieved at the cost of very strict standardization and imposing of that social values which no one can accept as its individual values, and that's why we have so high level of academic integrity violation. But now in post-classical, we can see that opposition finally sublated. So, thanks for your attention, and that's how I intended to show, well, thus we can say that the dichotomy of heteronomic and autonomous ethics, singled out by Twardowski more than 100 years ago, could be sublated in a dialectical way on the example of the current development of contemporary science.